and Western allies. This was because the U.S. was locked, obviously, in the Cold War at this time with the Soviet Union, and both sides, the U.S. and the USSR, wanted control of the Middle Eastern oil supply. And so the USA, therefore, found it helpful that the Ba'ath Party was staunchly anti-communist, and that's why they tried to ally with it in the 60s. Within the Arab world, too, Saddam's reputation was on the rise. In 1967, I kind of forgot about this, as an important thing happened, the Six-Day War between the Arab countries, let's say it was Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, versus Israel in an attempt to destroy Israel, which became a country in 1948 in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And it was a major victory for Israel in the war. Despite being outnumbered really and ganged up on every side, they won the 1967 Six-Day War. And that was a humiliation for Nasser. He never recovered from it. And so Nasser's out of the way. So Saddam sees a pathway for him to become the leader of the Arab world now that Nasser in Egypt is out of the way. In 1972, Saddam is moving up the hierarchy of Iraqi politics, and now he's probably like the number 2 or number 3 guy in the entire government. 1972. He nationalized the Iraqi oil industry. Now, remember from the last video, that's something that Mossadegh did, and which led to the CIA getting involved to overthrow Mossadegh. But for some reason, the CIA didn't engage in the same conspiracy to overthrow Saddam Hussein. But a year later, in 1973, another war took place between Israel and the Arab countries. It was another total victory for Israel. But the thing to take out of that is that the U.S. openly declared support for Israel. And in response to that, Saudi Arabia, which was the biggest oil producer at the time, turned the tap off and stopped pumping oil. So when you withdraw the supply of a good like that, the demand and the price is going to go up. And so the price of oil in 1973 shot up like quadruple in price. And because oil was so expensive, and it filled the banks of some of these Middle Eastern countries by selling their oil abroad, Saddam was able to use that money to launch a massive social spending spree and like to an upheaval programs, social upheaval programs of like education, healthcare, all things like that. And so the people of Iraq benefited a great deal from Saddam's policies, even though he was only able to do that because the price of oil shot up, because Saudi Arabia was angry at America for supporting Israel in a war against the Arab countries. You follow that? In fact, the United Nations, that fantastic organization that we love so much, gave Saddam an award for being such a great guy, UNESCO Heritage Award. Okay, a few years later, 1976, Saddam was made a general in the Iraqi army, which increased his power even more. He put a lot of newspapers on the payroll and used propaganda to further his message. And they praised him as being the defender of the Arab world, and that he was going to defend the Muslims from Jews and all this stuff. Last little bit here. In 1979, al-Bakr, who was Saddam's cousin, became a little alarmed at Saddam's rise in power, and he proposed a treaty with Syria, which would have diluted Saddam's power base. It would have like drawn the Baathists into Syria. So Saddam acted quickly, and he forced his cousin al-Bakr to resign for health reasons. He probably put a gun to the back of his head, and he took the position of president himself. That's 1979. Saddam becomes the president of Iraq, and he immediately called a meeting of the party leadership, and in front of the television cameras, he claimed to have uncovered this plot to have him assassinated. He read out the names of 68 conspirators. Sound familiar? But Stalin did during the show trials to guys like Zinoviev and Kamenev, Bukharin later on. Same program, same game plan. So 1979, Saddam Hussein becomes the president of Iraq. And in 1979, the Ayatollah comes back to Iran. The Shah is overthrown. The U.S. embassy crisis is ongoing. A critical year, 1979. And two of these things are happening side by side in countries that border each other, Iraq and Iran. Now, the next thing that we're going to be talking about is, of course, the war between these two countries, because they're both very powerful countries being run by very powerful men. Of course, it's going to lead to a competition and a devastating, brutal conflict that we'll study about next week. So I have some questions for you below based on the content of this video. And if you have any questions further than that, please feel free to post them in the comments section in the Google Classroom. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you next week.